Good evening, one and all, ladies and gentlemen, fans of gratuitous metal-on-metal violence. Ladies and gentlemen, Battlebots Season 10.0 is coming up very, very shortly. And we got some fantastic news this morning that the roster was announced. I can't quite remember exactly how many are competing this year. I think it's usually something about like either 60 or at least 65 or 6 or so competitors are competing, which Battlebots being what it is, that's actually a very, very high roster. In fact, actually, the more I think about it, no, this is season 11.0. That's remarkable because we've now survived the 5-season curse, so we know Battlebots is going to continue and going to continue into season 12.0. But before we even get to that, we have got the all-important thing. The thing you've probably clicked on this video right now is that we're going to go over some of the teams. And by that, I mean we're going to go over all the teams. I'm going to go over what my impressions are of each team, returning competitors, new ones, including seeing some old faces come back into the sport. So, let's begin. Big Dill. Now, Big Dill actually, this is their second season competing. It's a lifting mechanism with these two giant green forks. It looks like a tongue with like the big chunk in the middle split down the end. It's got these huge giant almost white shields on either side of the weapon. It's basically for impact absorbing material. It didn't do too great, unfortunately, in its breakout season. I think it's just sort of like you have to like get the bearings down. I imagine like for lifting robots, you've got to be fast, and you've also got to show a lot of aggression. You've got to push them against the wall, and then you've got to use your weapon effectively. But because so many robots nowadays are not just flush as for armor, but they're flush underneath, there's not a great deal you can get a hold of. So, in regards to like the improvements, Big Dill kind of looks a little bit smaller this time around. It looks a lot more compact, and I can't wait to find out exactly what we're going to see out of these guys come this coming season. How far in all seriousness do I think they're going to get? Well, we might have to wait and see for that. I hope they go some places in this competition. I hope they cause some upsets, but for now I think we'll just have to wait and see exactly what's to hold for Big Dill, so keep your eyes out for that. Our next competitors, ladies and gentlemen, is a Brazilian team going by the name of Black Dragon. It's actually it's their third season competing in Battlebots. They won the second Desperado tournament by beating fellow Brazilians Minotaur in the final. It's a really... It is as the picture looks. It's two-wheel drive. It's one giant egg beater spinner at the front. Although I love the fact there's a slight curve to it. I didn't actually notice this before. There's a slight curve to its spinning bar this time around. It looks relatively the same as before, but then again, last season Black Dragon surprised a lot of people, not just by knocking out tournament favourites Tombstone, but also surviving a fire for 100 seconds in their titanic battle against Ribot and advancing to the semi-finals to sadly lose to the likes of, I don't know if it was either Whiplash or Endgame. It's strange. You would have thought I'd been on top of these sort of things. Now, in terms of what do I think about like Black Dragon's chances this season, I like to imagine that they have a very, very strong chance, because it's not just of the caliber of the opponents they're always against, but it's also about the caliber of their engineering. I think it's fair to say if you can survive 100 seconds while basically half the robot's on fire, I think this tournament's going to be a doddle. So Black Dragon is, I think, going to be one of the surprises this time around. They surprised a lot of people last year. I think they'll surprise even more people this time around. Blacksmith, by veteran builder Al Kindle, and they've returned this time not with their flaming hammer design, but they've gone for a saw blaze inspired hammer saw configuration. The idea being is that there's this huge circular disc on an arm, and then it swings down and basically either cuts or, I'm going to say, or saws through basically. I'm going to assume this is more more of a hammer saw, because it doesn't really look designed for cutting. It's more designed for whacking and then just chopping a great chunk out of the top of any robot it comes across. Now, aside from that, Blacksmith is sort of, it's maintained its design more or less, and I do like the striking nuclear blast logo on the side. Now, the only problem and also the green forks, which I like the fact they're also like pivoted so they're either flush to the ground, but if they're in the air, they can sort of like be in a different position. So I'm going to guess that's to aid in self-righting, as well as with its hammer saw. Now, the only other problem I can sort of like see for Blacksmith possibly is that it's quite long, when usually robots of this design have to be quite wide. If you take a look at Sawblaze, and we will take a look at Sawblaze, and I'll go over why it works for Sawblaze, and probably it might work for Blacksmith. It's just, it's gonna have to rely a lot on being. Sawblaze relies a lot on great driving, but for a design like Blacksmith's this time around, it's going to have to be even better than that. So, and I don't want to say anything bad for Al Kindle or anything, but you're going to be possibly going up against one of the best drivers in Battlebots in Jameson Go. So we're going to have to just wait and see. Let's not count anyone out until we know what's good. Now, our next team, ladies and gentlemen, is our first rookie team of the season. I believe this is meant to be either a South Korean team. One of the first of many Asian teams we've seen in BattleBots over the last number of seasons. We saw the likes of Wonhu, Railgun Max, and we are being introduced to Blade, which, when I saw this morning, it kind of, for me, looked like one of those fancy like air blowing devices that has the giant green plastic just stuck on the side, and it's meant to look really realistic. Except Blade, and I didn't even notice how huge the blade was on Blade, and it really is something. I especially even like its spring-loaded anti-spinner armor, sort of inspired by Lockjaw from previous seasons. It looks. I'm not entirely sure about how exposed, so like either if it's the chain or the gear or something like that on the sides. I'm not entirely sure how well that's gonna hold up, especially because the sides protecting the wheels look quite thin, I suppose is the word I want to say. And I don't even know, obviously I don't think these are weapon belts right here, but it looks quite practical. It looks like it's supposed to take on spinners and then to destroy people with spinners. Now, aside from that, I have no other evidence to the contrary, so Blade, we're going to have to see what they can do, but I will say this. It looks cool. It really looks cool. I like the bright colors of it. It almost, it's like one of those like electric cars that like the electric Mercedes SLS, I think it's called. It kind of looks pretty. It looks cool. I'll give Blade credit. It's cool. Team Blip. It looks like a launcher. It goes by the name of. It's basically just like a flipper. But the only thing I'm sort of like looking to myself right now is, where is the flipper or the launcher? I think it's meant to be like front hinged, I suppose, because you've got these forks here and they lead up to the flipping arm, I suppose, right here, which is just the panel on top. That's quite a journey. But the bot's gonna have to go quite far up the robot first of all for then the flipper to be like most effective. This is also, bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a returning team. I think I can't really remember ever seeing these guys before, but I'll certainly say this Blip. I hope it does something quite impressive. Otherwise, it'll just become another blip on the BattleBots radar of many robots that only fight for one time, like Jasper, Shellshock. Where else do we go? Stuff like Battle Royale with Cheese. I hope we see at least something impressive out of them. Speaking of teams that are impressive, meanwhile, Team Bloodsport is back. Now, Bloodsport, aside from its cool name and its incredibly cool design, I love the ideas of like almost harping back to the likes of Hazard in Battlebots and also Perfect Phoenix, or Brutality is the word I'm looking for. It's a 3-pronged spinner with 4 tiny little wedges in front. It's a really small machine as well, and it has this huge pipe on top, which is its self-righting mechanism, so that the weapon gets up to speed and let the laws of physics take its natural course. I like the fact it's got more like red splatter all over it, and the contrast between the black makes it look really sharp. This is their 3rd time competing in Battlebots as well, which, when you think about it, when you get to that point where you've competed for the 3rd time, you start off with something quite raw, then you build on it, and then you work on it. And I just hope Bloodsport for 21 is going to be not work in process, but the final completion. This possibly might be in there, because it got very far last year, only to lose out to the likes of Tantrum, and it's still got, I think it's got a long way to go. But then again, Bloodsport, if they've worked out all the problems in their wars against the likes of Gruff or Tantrum, I think we could be looking at yet another very strong contender for the Giant Nut this year. There are lots of competitors for that, and if you don't want to get the Giant Nut this time around, I reckon, well, we could sort of sort that from the week. However, we get the likes of Captain Shredderator coming back. And I like Captain Shredderator just because, again, it's built by, again, another BattleBots veteran who built the likes of Frisbee and Frisbee Ultimate in the past. Full-body spinners do have a tendency to break themselves more often than others. And this is down to simply the machines not being able to actually take the impact that they're able to dish out. What makes Shredderator look slightly better, I suppose, one thing that made it look slightly better in last season is that it had proper directional controls. It was a little bit more reliable. I will say, I think what Shredderator's done this time around, it's gone for more cinder, more like blocks on the side as opposed to claw-shaped hammer cutters. I don't exactly know how that's going to be good to like take off armor, or if it's meant to actually like knock in armor, so it like jams up wheels or does something to armor and electronics. But Shredderator, I think, should at least. I just simply don't know exactly when it comes to Shredderator. It's a very. They can put on good fights. It's just they don't win many of them. That's very unfortunate to say. Although I do like that it's now got sort of like the armor on top looks quite interesting. Now it looks even more like the Captain America shield than before, if it didn't look like that already. Follow up next time, ladies and gentlemen, is the return of Claw Viper. It wasn't an especially great machine last year. It was most famous for its speed and rather almost never really using its weapon, which was meant to be like this claw lifted device, so it's meant to almost like deliver like a suplex, complete control style. It's gone for more armor around the side of the wheels this time. It looks shorter, a little bit wider, and apart from the fact the weaponry sticks out because it's just white with little bits of red sticking out here and there, Claw Viper looks relatively unchanged compared to last year. Well, aside from the design, the look of the weapon, and maybe it's speed or something like that. I want to know exactly if it's going to make Claw Viper any slower, because Claw Viper was one of the fastest bots competing last year. Didn't get very far, but that's part and parcel of this competition, ladies and gentlemen, is that there's emphasis on weaponry. And you've got to have weaponry or you're not going to go too far in this competition, I'm afraid. No matter how many years of experience you had. But speaking of machines that do have weaponry, a former Robot Wars champion, or rather I should say Robot Wars team in the UK at least, in the return of Cobalt, returning to Battlebots for its 3rd season. It featured in the 2019 season 9.0. It did really well, but then it started losing fights that it really should have won against, like Duck and Endgame, and then losing one very titanic back and forth battle between Minotaur, basically threw Cobalt out of the competition. It is a giant vertical spinner on a It's basically if you just make Carbide and decide you want to turn it into a very lethal vertical spinner. And remember, Carbide was famous in Robot Wars because there was almost nothing that could stand up to it. Unfortunately, Cobalt seems to have almost like the opposite problem, is that it's thrown into a field that has so many tough vertical spinners, and it's not that so much Cobalt isn't tough or really that reliable, it's rather Cobalt sometimes does meet its match with its design and how powerful, and if it can get its weapon into play. If Cobalt can get its weapon into play, just more than anything, I think it's going to stand a good chance in this competition. I hope it does, because, you know, it seems like the sort of robot that looks like it should win more fights than it shouldn't. But we're going to have to wait and see. Like with everything, you're going to just have to wait and see what we get. However, then we get machines like Copperhead, returning for their... I believe this is their 4th year competing in Battlebots. And remember, this was in their first competition in Battlebots all the way back in 2016 when they had the Poison Arrow machine and managed to knock off Son of Waiachi, a former champion, and then it comes back looking like this. And Copperhead was an absolute riot last year around, and then all of a sudden lost to the likes of Mammoth in the first round of the championship, which that was really, really surprising, ladies and gentlemen. But what's slightly more surprising, I don't know if it's just the picture I'm using, but it's got sort of like a strange little protection. It's got like little sticks just before the wheels, which I don't know how well that's going to do. Also, I'm not entirely sure, but whether or not Copperhead always had these chains sort of just sticking just between the wheels and the machine. And also, this just all the damage, or is this just a rust sort of effect they look? Because I hope it is, and it's just they didn't bother to... How embarrassing it would be if they just didn't decide to change anything. Is an interesting tactic, because there wasn't really too much wrong with Copperhead last time around, aside from problems it kind of had with its weaponry at the sort of when it shouldn't done, especially against Mammoth. Although I will admit, just looking at this now, and you can see how much mass that looks like there's going into this weapon, I think it's fair to say that Copperhead should not have the same problem twice. I hope it doesn't, because Copperhead can generate its own death hum, which is a famous Battlebots term for saying it can generate the revolutions it spins is so mesmerizing that if you touch it, your entire arm's coming off. It's meant to be, it's like being dragged into a jet engine, you could say. Now, following up this, ladies and gentlemen, hopefully one not getting its arm chopped off is the likes of Deadlift, returning for their second Battlebot season, and they've sort of gone for a more workout layout right now, with like the handlebars on the sides, with what looks like varying degrees of like small little weights. I'm pretty sure these are just like for decorations this time around. Deadlift was basically just a platform that can shoot fire. This time around, they've gone for more of like a claw viper sort of idea with this giant arm sort of design. It really does kind of look like an arm if you just use your imagination here. And I hope it is going to be like more of like a suplex design, because Deadlift was actually quite tough last time around. We didn't see it on TV that often, and when we did, we just didn't really see much of it in action. Now, hopefully, we get to see Deadlift maybe a bit more. I think we're just going to have to see what kind of bots it gets thrown into. We're seeing a lot more of these lifting devices, as you will in Battlebots, but whether or not they get thrown into a very particular sort of field, we'll have to wait and see on that. Well, I can honestly say to you right now, ladies and gentlemen, it would be extremely interesting if, for one reason or another, they got thrown into a match against Deep Six. Yes, Deep Six is coming back for its second season. And just looking at this, if you saw what Deep Six looked like before, the only thing I could tell you that was different about it is that it just had basically one long bar along it for its weapon. It didn't have the sort of brakes. You see these brakes here along the back. I think they were specifically so that because Deep Six also generates so much power in its weapon that it caused more damage to itself upon testing in the 2019 season, which is sadly why we didn't see too much of Deep Six. However, I think with all certainty we're going to be seeing a lot more of Deep Six this time around. It's got 2 giant eagle heads, and I wonder if this is meant to be like in reference to double-headed Death Flamingo team, I think they're called. Painted copper as well, which I think is quite an interesting look against the black. But Deep Six, honest to God, I want to see it fight something really, really big. I want to see if it can slice something in half. I'm not talking about when Deep Six managed to crack Axe Backwards open. I want to see them almost like claw out the likes of Nelly the Ellie boss this time around. But the thing is that might not even be that easy to do, because there are so many. A lot of the robots coming into the season are so short that I wonder if Deep Six will even be able to get a hit on them. We'll just have to wait and see on that. But following this up, we do get another sort of like a very interesting little newcomer from a very experienced Jason Varquez in Defender, which is another claw lifter device. This one because this one's only 2-wheel drive and it's very wide, and that's it's I don't even know what I'm supposed to make of it either. There's a lot of like open air space, which I suppose is why it's so wide and has to make room for that. It looks pretty practical. I just want to know what exactly it could do to like cause damage or to like cause mayhem for other robots. I want to know exactly what I think it looks like something that could be effective, but unfortunately one of the aims in this game, ladies and gentlemen, one of the categories is to do damage. And that's one of the big problems you're going to see with like a lot of like lifters or flippers this time around. They simply don't cause damage unless of course they can make life difficult, but they can't necessarily win too many points on damage unless something really bizarre happens. Like for example, Double Jeopardy. The very first Battlebots in history that had a cannon weapon, as you can see right here. Unfortunately, that's about the most interesting thing about Double Jeopardy. Aside from that, it's just sort of a box design. It's got technically a wedge, but it doesn't really have much power to push. And I believe it has like 6... I don't even know exactly how many slug type weapons it can shoot out. And this is their 3rd year competing in Battlebots. It's never really gone much beyond the odd Rumble type match. We'll have to I'll have just to wait and see that. I don't want to say that I don't believe in Double Jeopardy, but I think it looks like a little bit more trouble than it's worth. I love the ingenuity behind it. I love the reason why they will want to do something really unique, but maybe in like an estate fair, but not for something when you're in a competition with the likes of Tombstone, Deep Six, or Sawblaze, that sort of thing. However, ladies and gentlemen, we then get another rookie team coming this season in the form of Dragon Slayer. Now, I know I've seen this design before. I think it was like the Great Pumpkin, or it might have been a very similar sort of design. It's 2-wheel drive, huge pneumatic tires, and a very interesting like paint scheme for the weapon. It's like dragon scales and one blue and then one green with flames, and it's got little tails on the back. It looks like it could be effective. I mean, sometimes the simplest designs really are the best. I just want to know exactly what sort of fights it will get thrown itself into, and we'll have to find out whether or not there are any big beasts or really that substantial dragons to slay in this competition. Don't get me wrong, there's lots to choose from. Let's just hope Dragon Slayer doesn't go down in one hit. That's all I'm saying. Because they could be fighting the likes of Duck. Hal Rucker's famous amphibian beast returns for its 4th BattleBots season. Actually, no, it's returning for its 3rd season. Just shows you how bad my memory is, isn't it? They've almost redesigned the whole machine again. In previous seasons, it had basically just a face and a lifting bill on it, which would lift from the front. In season 8.0, in season 9.0, it had the arm sort of attached in the middle of the machine, so it was sort of like an overhead axe as well as a lifter, renowned for being one of the sturdiest machines in the field. And now this time they've gone for basically a flat box with a lifting beak on it, which I suppose that's I'm just gonna say right now, I think if Duck doesn't get thrown against too many vertical spinners, Duck could find itself maybe getting a good shot at the top 16. It hasn't made the top 16 before, or even close to, or well, it just hasn't faced the top 16. Mostly because its lack of damaging weaponry does become a bit of an issue. We saw that in season 9.0 when it lost its fight against Yeti, that's one of the biggest issues you're going to find with Duck, is that its weapon doesn't cause damage. It can cause problems, but just not damage. And that's going to be a big problem, especially because of this next machine. Last year's champions, Endgame, the first ever foreign team to take home the giant nut back to New Zealand. And Endgame looks mostly unchanged, aside from its self-righting mechanism, and I think they're sort of more reverting to, again, it's sort of like its championship fight we saw against Whiplash. Basically, extremely flat, with wedges on the front, and it's asymmetrical vertical spinners. Now, Endgame has always been one of those machines, again, before its championship season, it had a lot of boast, but it sadly just didn't really meet a lot of expectations. And then it ran into a lot of technical issues in season 9.0, but it was a beautiful time to see them come into their own last year and take home the gold. And Endgame has got a lot to prove to a lot more people, that it's going to hold its title. So, can Endgame do it? I think they stand a really good chance of holding it, but you're going to have to be surprised, ladies and gentlemen. There are so many surprises, twists, up and downs, and I couldn't predict who would win this. Maybe Blip might get a chance at the giant nut this year. Well, all of them can, in the same way. Similar to Battlebots veteran Gary Jin, one of the best drivers in the entire sport. And just counting from season 6.0 onwards, this is Gary Jin's third time competing in Battlebots in the revamped season. And it's basically its same design that it had in season 9.0, except for the fact that it looks like it's, if you've ever seen its fight against Yeti, you'll know that Freeshipping only lost through taking only slightly more damage. It's basically, Freeshipping is a mile-long wedge that also lifts. It's a tried and tested design. It can take an awful lot amount of damage. But it's also extremely reliable and can keep on going. Freeshipping has a really, really good track record for being extremely reliable. But possibly that's because of the team behind it, as well as, years and years of experience, not just in engineering, but also in building fighting robots. Though again, Freeshipping, I'm just going to see how well Freeshipping can do. Maybe there's something we haven't seen yet in Gary Jin. Maybe he's going to unveil a surprise. Compared to that forklift design that he brought in season 8.0, that was just kind of funny. I mean, just looking back on it, but I want to see how Freeshipping goes. Let's give them a fair shot. Speaking of giving fair shots, ladies and gentlemen, Fusion from Team Waiachi. This is a dual spinner. It is a triangle spinner at front, possibly in homage to its father, son of Waiachi, as well as a vertical spinner at the back. It's really useful to actually kind of have a setup in this way, because there's almost no real way of attacking Fusion without hitting something. And also because Fusion is such a small, compact design, is that you've almost got no other way to attack it apart from it's almost like going up against a full body spinner. You can't really attack it any other way, except for maybe on top. Also, Fusion boasts to have extreme amounts of power in its weaponry as well, so it's not just getting hit by either one of them, but you're going to go for a ride if you do. Now, unfortunately, again, Fusion does have problems like reliability. Having an arc fire on the top of Tantrum last year was mostly responsible for what takes them out. But if Fusion could just sort of solve its teething problems, I think, again, Fusion have just about as much a chance as anyone else. I'll get into it later on, but what you're going to see from the YRG team is that they want their giant nut bad. But then again, it could also go to the likes of Chuck Pizza, another veteran, bringing back Ghost Raptor. This is a team that's been competing for basically all throughout the classic series of Battlebots, and this is now entering its 4th season in the revamped. It's one of the oldest competitors still in this competition, and it still looks kind of the same as before. The only real difference I can see out of Ghost Raptor is that it's Raptor sort of designs along the machine, a little bit of spray paint here, and maybe it got onto the blade as well. I know very well that Chuck Pitts, the problem is that Chuck Pitts' sort of design goes for its like drivetrain, goes all the way back to the year 2000. And we're 21 years later, ladies and gentlemen. You kind of wonder to yourselves, there's got to be more like efficient ways of this, because Ghost Raptor also has a terrible habit of breaking down in the modern series. Not just because of the opponents it faces, but rather just to some of its components being extremely brittle. You can see this just going back to watching its first fight last year against Shatter. Shatter didn't even really hit them that hard, and Ghost Raptor's electronics just gave up. And what was very interesting last time is John Malandik's Gigabyte returns. This is now its fourth I'm sorry about that. Its 4th season competing in Battlebots, and Gigabyte proved a lot of people wrong last year. It fought and fought and fought. It got its way into the round of 16, only to be flipped, tossed all over the place by Hydra. And Gigabyte can cause a lot of damage. The only problem is, ladies and gentlemen, is that what Gigabyte needs to sort of like rely on more than anything is its agility in driving. It needs to get up to top speed, which takes about roughly 5 seconds before it can even think about attacking. Basically, any fight that features Gigabyte, you can almost tell by like the very first few seconds exactly how it's going to end. And Gigabyte, to its credit, looks lower. It looks like they put a lot more weight into the 2 blades this time on the sides of Gigabyte, which means that probably there's going to be a lot more force and weight going into them. So, well, I can't wait to see what Gigabyte can do. I just want to see shit get torn up. That's what I want to see, and Gigabyte should at least give us something interesting to look at. Gigabyte fights are always fun because you never know whether Chris Rhodes or anyone at ringside is going to stay alive. They don't know whether to duck or to jump in case they get their legs torn off. They're really exciting fights to watch, and it'll be really fun to see Gigabyte competing again. It's always good to see them. Now, ladies and gentlemen, one of the exciting things that I saw on Reddit in the lead up to the selection of the roster was this machine called Glitch, built by Kyle Miller in its very first year competing in Battlebots. It's a very long, low triangle with this huge egg beater spinner, and if you could just see the curve of the edge of its spinner, that looks like it's going to take off so much armor if it gets the right place. And again, the triangle, I think the triangle is just because it's going to be so hard to like break into, and when you think about it, because it's also a good way of protecting a lot of the electronics because they're basically on the back of the machine. I want to see Glitch in action because I think this is going to be a really, really strong outing from this team. I don't know, again, without having much to go on, having not seen it actually in a fight, I think Glitch might cause a few surprises here. But I do wonder whether or not if it goes up against something like an Axe, it might have problems. But again, Glitch might cause more than its fair share of problems for the rest of the roster. However, if you want to talk about machines that are tough, ladies and gentlemen, then you can always take a look at Grunt by Sam Sam McCamus. It is the famous giant flamethrower of Battlebots. It's Battlebots' own Sergeant Bash. Competing in its 3rd season, Gruff is one of the hardest and toughest machines that you're ever actually going to crack. It's got 2 huge lifting forks up the middle and these 2 huge flamethrowers at the side. And when we say huge, ladies and gentlemen, we do mean huge. They are going to toast enemies alive. The only problem I can almost see, however, with the design is that the flamethrowers are quite a long way back, and it's not so much you're walking across a long room compared to the front of Gruff, but you kind of almost want Gruff to drive up and actually pin someone by putting the forks underneath and then shooting at them with the flamethrower. Now, aside from that, you can see how much armor they're putting on their front wedge, which makes me to believe about how much of their sides and their underbelly is going to be protected. But I think Gruff is sort of designed as the spinner killer. It knows what it wants to go up against. Now, with that being said, Gruff managed to get into the round of 32 last time around and lost by, I think, 1 or 2 points to Bloodsport. I think Gruff, if Gruff can be a little bit more destructive this time around, you're looking at a very, very strong competitor. Now, of course, with that being said, I wish I could say the same, but I think I probably will when it comes to Jen Hedgenroder's Hijinx. Hijinx is this huge undercutter spinner with 2 very thin wheels at the side and this little tail on the back so that it stays mobile. I love the look of Hijinx. It's a more colourful PP3D. It's got more character, it's got more personality, it's got eyes, it's got a nose, it's got this really cool, the weapon looks really cool. It's just, I honestly think, I don't know whether or not the weapon looks too heavy or whether or not it just looks like there's not enough armor or, protection on top. But Hijinx, again, did well enough to get to the round of 32 before being ejected from the competition by Uppercut. Now, I don't necessarily say, again, Hijinx doesn't have a shot this time around, but I suppose it's all going to come down to what it gets pitted up against. With that being said, however, I'm glad to see Hijinx back. I mean, how rare it is to even see machines that are pink in this season is a novelty. However, ladies and gentlemen, if you do, however, want to look towards something of the opposite extreme, you need no look further than Huge. Competing for their 4th season in Battlebots, Jonathan Schultz's absolutely barbaric but brilliant creation didn't exactly have the greatest time in season 10.0. I did remember they did get to the round of 32, but I think they lost quite early to somebody. I honestly couldn't tell you who it was, or even if they even made it that far. And that's because I think some of the problems Hijinx, Huge I should say, had last season, from just being outmatched to from being cheated out of victories, to just about everything else aside from, its wheels getting torn apart. Huge is almost entirely reliant on victories depending on who it gets put up against. This is one of those machines where it could take on anybody in the field, and then we'll have to see what it goes, because there is no other machine in this competition like Huge. It's a huge vertical spinner between two huge wheels on either side, which means that all of its electronics are protected basically in the very center of the machine here. And again, even if it gets put up against Deep 6, however, it might have some trouble. But in fact, actually, that might be a fight we want to see, Huge against Deep 6. We want to see whether or not Huge can, because we've seen Huge being split apart before against Icewave and Bite Force, but I don't know whether or not Huge can really substand the sort of walloping that some other machines might give it. Speaking of being cheated out of victories, Hydra is back this season again. Now, this is also another part of Team Waiachi, a team that's been going back since 2001. And this is Hydra's third season in competing in Battlebots. It posed to have the most powerful hydraulic flipper in history, and from what I've seen, they do have a very strong case in point. You will never see a flipper as powerful as Hydra. It doesn't look like that. I will admit it doesn't really look like that on the surface, but let me tell you now, ladies and gentlemen, if you've never seen Hydra in action, you should, because Hydra can do things you will never see any other flipper in the world can do, including cheating certain other bots out of very easy victories, aka huge. Now, I heard a lot of rumors on Reddit that Hydra was coming into the season with interchangeable front wedges so some of the forks stick out further so they can get a better hold underneath other opponents, because Hydra is actually very low to the ground and has had issues of catching the seams in the metal floor. Also, if there was any speculation that Hydra is also coming into the season with an interchangeable front vertical spinning disc, horizontal disc, I should say, because no, it is a vertical. I'm getting confused about the difference between vertical and horizontal here. But if Hydra gets, if that does go through and it does come out with that configuration, I don't exactly know why. I don't really know exactly what sort of fights Hydra can win like that. But with that being said, Hydra has only really lost 2 fights in its Battlebots career against Minotaur and Whiplash. I don't even know if Hydra is this prepared, coming in with 2 machines this time around, just like last season and the season before. Well, technically, season 9 they came in with 3 machines, but we don't really speak of Falcon, unfortunately. I think, again, Waiachi, you might want to watch out, because they could be, if it's not Fusion, it might be Hydra, and if it's not Hydra, it might not be Fusion either. Although, again, the irony of seeing at least 2 of the same team fight in the finals is going to be a bit of an awkward one to tell coming home. Sadly, however, speaking of awkward, we get Will Bates returning with his Hypershock machine. This is their 6th time now competing in modern Battlebots, and Hypershock has had a very up and down relationship with Battlebots. It's a machine that you would say on the surface looks like it should do far better than it does. However, through problems of its weaponry in Season 8.0, in Season 8.0, Hypershock just never really got going at all. But now, in Season 9, back in Season 9, Hypershock managed to solve the problem with its weaponry, fitting a wedge onto it this time and sticking to only 1 vertical disc, and Hypershock got a lot further than a lot of people were expecting. However, last season, Hypershock it had problem after problem after problem with electronics. And it's not even the design isn't bad or anything, I just wonder whether or not Will Bates is he knows what's going on. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I think this time Will Bates, as well as another very experienced team, should come into this with another front wedge, 2 vertical spinners at the front, this really flush sort of design on the back, huge pneumatic tires. Hypershock, just do better. I want to see Hypershock do a lot better than it does. And it only just got into the round of 32 championship last year, where they were tossed back and forth by Hydra. Come on, Will Bates, we know you can do better than this. But if you want to talk about experience, you want to talk about destruction, ladies and gentlemen, Icewave, Mark DeVitz's absolutely... I mean, just let's think about this for 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. This is technically their 5th time competing in Battlebots. It did compete in Season 10.0, but as part of the Bounty Hunter tournament, where it would face an eventual winner. But Icewave stands for rethink. Internal combustion engine wave. And because that is exactly what that giant block is with the exhaust in. It's an internal combustion engine, which means that you will see this bar here go so fast and hits you so hard. And even just look at how thick that blade is. That is going to slice people in half. That isn't going to bash, smash, crash, wallop people. That is going to slice things in half. I mean, we saw Icewave do that very thing to Huge back in 2018. But if Icewave is coming back as a full-time competitor in Season 11.0, first off, I want them to. And second of all, I think if they do, Mark is going to go a very long way with Icewave. I love the machine, I love the noise it makes and the destruction it always brings, gentlemen. If the whole scene of like destruction is getting a little bit too much with how some serious competitors are coming in this season, how about we also come in with Jackpot? This is their second time competing in Battlebots, and in their first season, I don't think they could have won their first season, but they gave it a very, very good shot. It's basically just a green block with these two interesting diamond-shaped vertical spinners to go along with the casino sort of novelty, as well as it coming from Las Vegas, Nevada. I just like the design because again, it's simple, but it actually is a lot more effective than you might believe. They've had quite a lot of very interesting victories against the likes of Lockjaw and certain others last year. Now, I did know that they did have a problem with self-writing, mostly because they didn't have a device, and I wonder if that's what these like cannon-looking structures are on its back. I think that's to aid Jackpot in self-writing, which, hey, if they can, then I think Jackpot, they should run their luck once again. I want to see Jackpot go just that little bit further. I want to see just how far they can go. I also don't really want to see them go up against something like Icewave because, oh boy, it's been a little bit of a while since we last seen an entire weapon structure come off a machine, and I don't want Jackpot to be the unlucky one. Mind you, with that being said, if I was a little bit cautious about what I thought about Jackpot, how about PodOnMyFrench? Our first... I don't exactly know how many other teams from Canada are competing this time around, and PodOnMyFrench, it's strange because a lot of the joke sort of teams coming in this season, they don't necessarily look like joke bots anymore. They look like they were, at the very least, trying to be a little bit, competitive. I think although I must say PodOnMyFrench looks a bit small, and I think it's wearing like the emblem of you'd see in Quebec, which I suppose that could be where it is. I think this is also it's the first time I've ever seen this machine competing before, and it's got this small little mini bot. It just looks like a lifting wedge or something like that. And I will say that the sort of like the three claws on its spinning drum, PodOnMyFrench, it looks a little bit, you wouldn't necessarily think it would be the sort of thing that could do damage, and again, I'm not entirely sure about that myself. But again, let's at least see what it can do. You'll be surprised by the certain things that machines can do in this sport. Moving on from PodOnMyFrench, we're going to get another little rookie team, which basically is coming into this series with basically two mini versions of Valkyrie and Soulblaze. This is Team Jaeger, and it is how it looks. It's a tiny Soulblaze and it's a tiny Valkyrie. One's painted pink and the one that is painted white, like zebra stripes with a green blade. It's interesting to see just what exactly miniature versions of these can do. I don't know how well they will do. I don't know how well they're going to work together, or rather, let's just say I don't know exactly how this is going to work. Especially if it really does go up against Valkyrie or Soulblaze. Actually, that'll be pretty interesting to see Soulblaze go up against a multi-bot design. Can it even get? Well, yes, I think it will get through, but I wonder if we could actually see a machine cut in half by Soulblaze. However, one machine that is definitely not small in any way, shape or form is Kraken. Competing in their 4th time in Battlebots, Kraken does so much better every single time it comes back to Battlebots. And this is just a combination of good driving and a very intimidating looking weapon. It keeps getting... It impresses me more and more by how well it does in later fights. It's a it's a hydraulic crusher, and I think it's a lot of its components are sort of like comprised in the head, which is good to push down more weight, and it's got all these little spikes. I honestly thought they were painted on, but then of course you see these 2 huge fangs at the very front, and it will go through aluminium, like so. It managed to chop. It can chop through weaponry. It can chop through just the very skins of the machine. Kraken looks. It's basically it looks kind of a little bit just kind of the same as the last 2 seasons, but through good driving and hitting the right marks, Kraken managed to make it to the 32 round championship last year. Only 2 lose to Soulblaze, but Kraken put on a great show for a lot of people. And I want to see, again, Kraken do the same this time around. Now, however, ladies and gentlemen, we are really getting down to it with Donald Hudson's Lockjaw. Hudson has been basically being with Battlebots since the very, very beginning. Whether it's competing through the likes of competing with the likes of like Tooth Decay or Tazbot, Dissector, or even now as Lockjaw. One thing that always kind of like surprises me about Donald Hudson's designs is that they're complicated, but they do work, and that's possibly for the best, ladies and gentlemen, that Donald Hudson can do that. But in recent times with Lockjaw, I think Lockjaw is now limited by specifically what it can do. It can do damage, but you can see right here that its tires are they stick out like a sore thumb, and Lockjaw does have a habit of catching fire or if not smoking. Donald Hudson's machine Lockjaw is simply not as reliable as its previous machines are. And remember, this is Donald Hudson's the same man who brought us legends like Dissector and Tazbot. 2 of some of the most complex and convoluted machines you probably will ever see in Battlebots. And, well, I wish Donald all the best for this season, because Donald is still extremely competitive, and I know Firewall has spent a lot of time working on this machine. Let's just hope it doesn't give him more toothache than it's worth. Following this up, ladies and gentlemen, is another veteran team competing for their 4th season in Battlebots by the name of Lucky. It's this really long launch flipper design that has quite a lot of problems, I will admit. Its long body means that anything that's faster than Lucky also has not exactly the benefit of being exceptionally fast. It's not necessarily the fastest in the field either, which means that anything with a big spinner can get round to the sides or the back, and Lucky will be the one going for more rides in the air than anyone else. Now, with that being said, however, it looks like they've put a little bit more emphasis on its front end again. But whether or not this stops Lucky from, again, taking on more damage will just be the sort of thing that we'll have to just wait and see what happens. I do think, again, that Lucky, we'll have to see. It's not the luckiest of machines in this field, I'm afraid. Mad Catter is also returning this season, ladies and gentlemen, for its 3rd season in Battlebots. Mad Catter surprised a lot of people, not just in Season 9.0 because it arrived late and left quite early, but also last season, ladies and gentlemen, where it only lost 2 fights in the season, and only one of them was in the Bounty Hunter tournament. Aside from that, Mad Catter only lost to Tombstone last season. It won all 4 of its qualifying fights, and it was very quietly undisputed because Mad Catter had the weaponry, it kept working, and it could stand its own against quite a lot of opponents because 4 fights is a lot. They say in the UFC that 4 fights is a lot to go through, but if you've seen the sort of things that the likes of Mad Catter or even Lucky or even Lockjaw have to go through, you'll be quite surprised, ladies and gentlemen. They fight for our entertainment, and we should well and truly be entertained by them. Malice is also returning for its 2nd season. It's a big black machine with 2 wheels on the side, and it's a very interesting horizontal spinner on the front. It's big and chunky enough to sort of be more like a vertical spinner, and I like Malice's. I did like the design of Malice. It doesn't look like it can cause tremendous amounts of damage, but the problem that I always see with Malice is that whenever it charges in with its weapon, it will always like spin to the side, probably because of the force that its weapon creates. And if it's up against a spinner, it's going to take one side of its wheels completely off. We saw this in the likes of its fight against Gigabyte in the round of 32 last season. Now, or even when it fought really unlucky fights like against Mad Catter where it got stuck on its back. Hopefully they've been able to like remedy that sort of thing again. But aside from that, Malice, again, maybe it would just come down to the luck of the draw, but Malice should at least give us a few more surprises if we go down this rabbit hole, so to speak. However, ladies and gentlemen, if we're going to talk about fighting chances, ladies and gentlemen, then one machine that not many people would have given a fighting chance would be Mammoth. Competing in its 3rd season in Battlebots, Mammoth stands proud as being the inaugural tallest competing machine in the history of combat sports. It's 6'3" tall from the last time I remembered, and it has this interesting weapon. It's not so much like a lift or a spin, it's kind of both. The idea is that a chain pulls on the weapon pulls down, it hits a machine and either uplifts them or just like pushes them 20 feet out of the way. It's a very interesting and not necessarily the most unconventional sort of ideas for a weapon at all, because obviously it's going to be too tall for the likes of to be really a spinner due to its design, and it's also not going to have enough torque on the chains to be operable as a lifting device, so it's kind of 2 in 1 in some ways. However, Mammoth beating Copperhead in the round of 32 to get round to the round of 16 last season more than shows that Mammoth has got a lot going for it. Its awkward size and its very strange way to use its weaponry means that, kind of like Hughes, there's a lot of great ways you can prepare for it. And despite its huge wheels being one of the few things actually on the ground, not many bots have actually managed to hit them, which is a very strange thing indeed. So maybe we could see the dinosaurs well and truly rising, perhaps all the way to glory. We never know, ladies and gentlemen, we never know. However, then, of course, we are under the impression that, of course, Minotaur is returning to its 4th season. One of the most feared machines in all of Battlebots. It is another Brazilian native, just like our friend Black Dragon. This time, it's returning with sort of like a little bit like an extended shin, which for me suggests they're putting even more emphasis on its giant vertical spinner drum. And Minotaur also generates, just like Copperhead, its death hum. And when we say death, ladies and gentlemen, we mean your robot death. Dead, goodbye, never coming back. They didn't necessarily do too well in Season 9.0. They lost a lot of very close fights, and which is a bit of a sad come down because they got all the way to 2nd place in Season 8.0. However, if Minotaur are going to come back, then I think Minotaur again are going to be the sort of the ones to watch. Minotaur, I think, has so much going for them. Then I think it would be a shame not to see them go at least into the quarterfinals. Their 4th season in Battlebots, we received a return of Overhaul, a machine we haven't seen since season 8.0. It's now a 4-wheel drive lifter claw configuration. We've seen this design before in a bunch of other machines. Only that's sort of like the difference with Overhaul is that they sort of like move the weaponry like to the front of the machine, where as before they would have it sort of in the same position, but it was a lot lower to the ground, which means that, as you can see by the picture here, is that its claw has to be sort of like a little bit lower to the ground, when usually we will see in fights where the claw will sort of like be extended back and then it will clap down. I don't know whether this is just sort of like a quick redesign, because previous editions of Overhaul seen it was like really compact and really like smooth and nothing really wasted on it. But now with that being said, maybe the 4-wheel drive, the sort of the bigger wheels, mean it might have a better time in navigating the arena and being able to really pick any sort of weaknesses. We're gonna have to wait and see. With there being so many like lifters coming into this season, it's gonna be interesting to see whether or not like the likes of Claw Bible or Overhaul or Defender get put up against each other, because that could be a very interesting little confrontation. Just like if, for example, we see P1 being thrown into this mix as well. P1 returning for their 3rd season. It is a front-launched flipper on a very small, almost Le Mans racing car. 4-wheel drive, very low to the ground, has unfortunately been up against quite a lot of spinners in the past, which has sort of crumpled the front wedge. So if there's like any strength in P1's wedge this time, then you're going to have to, with there being so many vertical spinners as well as a lot of vertical spinners to come. I want to see P1 again do well this time around. Just I wonder how well they can realistically go in this. Pain Train kind of has the same problem. It's not a bad design. It's largely inspired from the likes of Minotaur, but its weapon is like so enclosed inside the machine that you're gonna have to. It's gonna have to attack machines at a very particular angle for its weaponry to be effective. Returning for their 2nd season, I think Pain Train might have learned quite a few lessons from its 1st season, and hell, you know what? They're willing to give this another shot. I think we should let them. Far be it from me to tell 2 robots to tell them that they can't fight each other. Just like Tyler Breeze returning for his 2nd season with Perfect Phoenix. Perfect Phoenix, for those uninitiated, is the old Brutality machine, built by former Battlebots champion Paul Ventimiglia, who is the builder of the famous Bite Force machine, 3-time champion. And the only problems like Perfect Phoenix sort of like had last time is that, whilst also largely inspired by Tony Buccagnani's Hazard, it's not so much like an outdated design, but plenty of machines know exactly how to navigate and how to attack machines like Perfect Phoenix. Now, with that being said, for trusting a 13-year-old kid to drive this thing, also under the tutelage of Ray Billings, perhaps Perfect Phoenix could bring us a few Phoenix Knights. Let's get ready to rumble! Oh god, if you've never seen Phoenix Knights, you won't have a clue what that's on about. Rampage returns to us for its 2nd season. It's a 4-wheel drive Brutus with a slightly more emphasized version of the wedge. I honestly wish I could say there was more about Rampage that I haven't said already, but Rampage, we're just gonna have to wait and see what they can do. It looks fine. The weapon is like a lot of other vertical spinners in this competition, but again, let's just see what they can do, because lots of machines can come in with a big weapon and just do nothing. It's like when you take its trousers down, you couldn't get it up for love or money. Speaking of getting up, Retrograde, another new team competing this season. Grey, black, lifting forks, 2 huge rear wheels, 2 forks at the front. Let's see how it does. That's literally all I have to say about Retrograde. However, if you thought Retrograde was sort of like uninitiated, or even Rampage looked a little bit inconspicuous to begin with, then you would be forgiven in thinking that if I was to tell you that Ribbot made it all the way to the final 8 last time around, then you would be sorely mistaken. Ribbot caused one of the biggest surprises in last year's competition by knocking out Uppercut. One of my picks to click. Now, Ribbot survives fights purely because it doesn't break down. Its weapon doesn't always work to the very end, but it survives fights when others sometimes have malfunctions, failures. Ribbot is the 101 curse of modern day Battlebots. However, since they're now competing in their 3rd season of Battlebots, we're going to see whether or not Ribbot needs to rely on curses, or can it just win fights of its own accord. It's won plenty of fights before, but we want to see it really go to town on somebody. Make somebody stay incredibly monkeress. Riptide, ladies and gentlemen, is also one of our new teams competing this season, and I'll level with you, ladies and gentlemen, it looks really interesting. It's got lifting forks, it's got an egg beater spinner, it's got a guy who looks like Johnny Sins who's on the team. It would be quite interesting just to sort of like kind of how you would see like Yeti fights. You would like use the claws, maybe lift somebody out of the way, or even shred the underneath with its spinner. It's kind of like very similar to those undercutter spinners, but it's like an undercutter vertical spinner. So Riptide might be able to pull the wool all over all of our eyes and deliver us something unforgettable. In comparison, ladies and gentlemen, Rotator again looks fairly straightforward, but don't let that fool you, ladies and gentlemen, because Rotator is brilliantly engineered, tough as old boots, has gone through a little bit of renovations, because before it used to be a double spinner disc with one spinner on the back, on top, and then another spinner down below. I think it's gone for the simpler configuration because it saves a lot of weight. It means that you can put more emphasis on the weapon. It means that the armor can be stronger. There's a lot of things you can do with a slightly more practical design, and Rotator is just one of those machines that's incredibly hard to knock down, incredibly hard to beat, and Rotator only really just lost against its fight with its war against Endgame last season in the round of 16. So Rotator, if they can do more damage than they receive, then I think Rotator again are going to go a long way in this tournament. How many fights they win is still up in the air, but we're just gonna have to wait and see. Rusty, however, I don't expect Rusty to win any fights. I don't expect it to do anything else than what Rusty does best. Get out there and fight the good fight. In fact, even with a hammer arm design for its 2nd season, a more simpler configuration to the monstrosity that we saw last season, Rusty, however, won the hearts and minds of all of its Battlebots contenders, and I think at the end of the day, isn't that what matters? Not machines getting torn up, although again that's a big part of it, but also machines that just could do it. Rusty isn't fast, sometimes. It isn't powerful, sometimes. It isn't particularly that menacing all the time. However, I love it. Then, of course, we get machines like Sawblaze, and competing for their 4th time in Battlebots, ladies and gentlemen, Sawblaze it keeps getting better. They keep refining the design so they can either make the the front stronger against spinners. They make the forks in a certain way so it can catch just about any machine it wants in its net. They revamped its weapon from a saw disc to a hammer saw to this beautiful dragon design for its blade. Saw blades with one of their best drivers in Jameson Go. I honestly, if Saw Blaze does not get to the quarterfinals this time around, I will be very, very surprised. And with this sort of field, I think we could be surprised because Saw Blaze has a lot of very stiff competition, like Shatter. First of all, can we just give points to Shatter's new axe design? Last time around, it was a very practical design in how it was basically a dentist drill hammer that caused a lot of strikes and did quite a lot of damage to a lot of very unsuspecting machines. But Shatter's strengths are very, very hard to pin down because there are a lot of them. From its resistant-proof armor, its really tough armor underneath all of those triangle designs. It's really, really accurate with its weaponry now, and its omni-wheel design means that it can drift, it can go backwards, it can move diagonally. We may as well call it a bishop. But Shatter I think Shatter, if they do not go far in this, because again, they reached the quarterfinals, they reached the top 8 last time around. Shatter shouldn't be the ones to be taken lightly, or they will smash you apart. But, ladies and gentlemen, it's also in the field with the likes of Scorpios. Scorpios is basically almost like a miniature version of Saw Blaze, but Scorpios has a lot of strengths, not just in how durable it is, how many times it can keep going and go on to win fights. Its hammer saw disc is really, really effective at the best of times, but also at the worst of times, ladies and gentlemen. Saw Blaze relies on its incredibly tough skin, its remarkable driving, and the fact that Scorpios is also extremely aggressive. It will not leave you alone for even one moment. But if you want to also see machines that don't want to leave each other alone, check out Slam-Mao, or Slam-O. I don't know how English works. This has been going on for a while anyway. Built by the UK builder Craig Danby, and also competing for their 4th season in Battlebots, with unfortunate failures like Foxtrot and Predator. Slam-Mo is actually being Craig Danby's best creation to date, managing to get as far as the finals 32 last time around. Slam-Mo relies on its claws and lifter to function as a suplex machine, which is really, really exciting on paper, ladies and gentlemen. And we want to see what else Slam-Mo can do this time around. There's a lot of machines coming into this that may not have the most effective weaponry, but a really interesting way about how they go about for certain fights. In particular, Smee. And of course, if you're wondering why it's called that, is because the driver wanted to find out how many letters they can actually have in finding out the name for a machine. Smee is not exactly what you might call championship, competitor, because it's a very novel design, I will say the least. The idea is that a machine charges at the very middle, and the two ends meet together in the middle with those undercutter spinners and slice, if they can, opportunistic looking wheels. It's not really so much like a cluster bot, but it's basically just like a huge wrapping wall. It hugs opponents tight and then gets to work in cutting them up. That's really all I gotta say about Smee. It is what you see, it is what it is. Sub-Zero, however, competing for their 5th season in Battlebots, and I know fine well the drivers say he competed all the way back with Hammer Time. Sub-Zero has always had this terrible reputation for being in many, many fights but never winning many of them. However, with that being said, its design is being refined, it's more effective, it can cause quite a few surprises, but Sub-Zero with so many first spinners and a lot of sadly exposed parts in certain places, I'm just going to have to wait and see exactly how far Sub-Zero can get, because they did get round to this the round of 32 last time, where sadly their hopes were cut down or foiled by Valkyrie, so we'll just have to again wait and see. Sub-Zero can take quite a bit of hits, but eventually one is going to knock it out. Switchback, however, I'm not entirely sure if it is maybe the one to do that, because Switchback has got this huge overarm vertical spinning drum, as it were, which, for the design for what it is, it's a very strange design to have like an overhead, because it would be more practical to just have like the drum on one end and then charge into other robots with it. Its design's an untested really design for this sort of competition, especially as they're competing for their first time. So we're just gonna have to wait and see what crops up. I don't really know what else I'm meant to say about that, but there you go. Tantrum, however, went from its rookie season from basically just being put in comedy matches against the likes of Battle Royale with Cheese, including just a free-for-all match against Tombstone in the final episode, where one of its fists on its self-righting mechanism got shot into an entire post on one side of the battle box. I do, however, think that, well, as we saw for ourselves, Tantrum has come leaps and bounds from comedy matches to finishing 4th in last season's Battlebots. And what makes Tantrum so incredibly special is that it's small, it's orange, it's tough, its very unique puncher spinning disc generates so much energy. That is the one that delivers the real knockout blow. It manages to knock off the likes of Fusion, of Witch Doctor, and Switch and Sword Blades. It'll be very interesting to see just how far Tantrum can go again, because Tantrum, if they weren't angry before, then they are now, because Tantrum, they can fight. Don't underestimate machines as small as that. However, another machine you should not in any way underestimate is Ray Billings' Tombstone, a former Battlebots champion, and now Ray is competing for his 6th season for the Giant Nut. Or for his 2nd Giant Nut, I should say. Ray has always done a fantastic job at always reworking, refining, and always tuning up Tombstone, which is always a good idea for a design that's so straightforward as Tombstone. Wheels and a big weapon on the front. Now I do, however, want to say, with the likes of Perfect Phoenix from before, can Tombstone still stand up to the best, or are its weaknesses now just a little too well known to the eyes of some other competitors? I know fine well Ray Billings would love nothing more than to get to his 2nd Giant Nut, but it's not going to be a walk in the park or anything like that, especially if Tombstone has to fight Black Dragon in its first fight again. Though with that being said, Tombstone since season 8.0 has always had the privilege as being one of the first machines to fight in the main event. We had it against Minotaur, we had it against Lockjaw, and then we had it against Endgame. And if Ray Billings hones it own once again, we could see Tombstone well and truly pile driving its way to victory. Unless of course it has to go up against Uppercut. And Uppercut, ladies and gentlemen, is just about one of the best machines I think you'll ever see in this competition. For proof of which, you should just ask Jameson Go, because Uppercut's the power behind its weaponry. If it doesn't knock out opponents in one hit, it will send them nearly 16 feet into the air, or it will knock out wheels, it will dent in armor, it will... Uppercut, we may as well just call Uppercut the true launcher spinner, because it doesn't just flip machines with its power, it will rocket them all the way across the ring, all the way to outside the arena. And these kids from MIT, I don't know what on earth degree or what kind of intel they're putting into Uppercut to teach it to be that strong, especially as this is their 3rd time competing in Battlebots. But let me tell you now, if Uppercut is coming in with more prepares, or even just as the same bot as last time, then I'm afraid to say Uppercut is going to leave a few dead and knocked out in the road as we go along. As well, unless of course it goes up against Valkyrie, for example. This beautiful looking underspinner, ladies and gentlemen, has had certain problems now that it's competing in its 4th season of Battlebots. Reliability issues, the weapon not working, but last season, ladies and gentlemen, Valkyrie gave us a much better showing, the best showing it's ever had in Battlebots. From its beautiful welding shaving spectacle against Rotator, to even surviving 2 hellacious assaults against Whiplash. One in the qualifying matches and then in the round of 16. Valkyrie can take a lot of pressure from what we've seen, but it should be also about how much Valkyrie can dish out as well. And Valkyrie might have a bit of its work cut out for them. I hope that's not the case and Valkyrie has the kind of success it's been building upon. Only time will tell for that sort of thing to happen. Especially if it's going against Jason Varquez's Whiplash. And Whiplash is just about one of the very best of all time. Competing now for its 5th season of Battlebots, Whiplash is just one of those machines that it's so simple in its layout, 4 wheels and a lifting arm, but it also has this spinning disc based on its lifting arm, so that you can lift them in the air, you can then smack it with the spinning disc, and Whiplash has aggression, it has perfect driving capabilities, and it is incredibly resistant to giant spinners. And bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, aside from that, Whiplash lost its first fight of season 10.0 to Sawblaze, went on to win every single fight since, and then only lose to Endgame in the finals. And I don't think you could ask Whiplash to do any more than that, but that means, ladies and gentlemen, if Whiplash are going to do better this time around, then they will be your 2021 Giant Nut winners of season 11.0. I do want that to be the case because I know how much this means to Jason. But if our last 2 competitors are anything to go by, then, well, they've got their work cut out for them. Because one of them is Witch Doctor. And Witch Doctor, competing now for the 6th time in Battlebots, Witch Doctor is a beautiful machine. From its skeleton design back to its beautiful green face on front, to the colourfulness of the costumes. And this is also a machine that has also finished runner-up in season 9.0. Witch Doctor gives out spectacular knockouts and survives from near-death experiences. Witch Doctor can just about do it all, except win the big one. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, the return of Yeti, competing now for the 4th season in Battlebots. Also with veteran robot build from Team Cool Robots, Christian Karlberg, who has also been in with Battlebots since the very, very beginning. From Crazy Hate Machine, Toe Crusher, Overkill, Minion, and Dreadnought, even going up to Overhaul and whatever that spinner was that it designed. No, can't remember it. But it's now competing with Yeti this time around, alongside another former Battlebots builder, Greg Gibson. And Yeti looks quite changed this time around. It's now more emphasis on armor. They've still got their brilliant lifting fork into giant spinning drum design laid out. More emphasis, looks smaller, nice wheels. It should also solve the problem with it gyroing so much. So it should stay on the floor more. It should be able to attack a little bit easier. I also want to know just how much power is going into its weapon, because one of the great things about, say, Yeti from its previous seasons is that they prioritized all weapon and no armor. And now it seems like they're almost doing a little bit of a reverse about that. But aside from that, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how well this sort of change will pay off for Yeti, but as with always, ladies and gentlemen, time may only tell. But from what we've seen so far, there's been a lot of machines we've seen so far that made practical uses of armor, as well as shielding themselves to the very teeth. But we'll wait to see whether or not Yeti will rule over this hazardous landscape. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That was all the competing machines for this season's 2021 of BattleBots. Did any catch your eye? Which one for you look like tournament winning favourites? I'll also do a video about my top 10 picks to click for this season, and I'll leave you all the links to the BattleBots website yourself if you want to check it out for yourself. And with all that being said and done, ladies and gentlemen, I will hope to see all of you guys again in the next video, where the bot battle will soon begin.